Welcome, everyone, to another masterclass here at A Mind for All Seasons. We're gathering today on July 3rd, 2026, as we prepare to celebrate the semi-quincentennial of the United States of America. And as we anticipate Independence Day, I want to talk to you today about ways to maintain our independence and what it means to declare independence. Now, if you've watched the Caregiver Minute videos, I've done some condensed versions of what I want to talk about today. So maybe consider that a preview of coming attractions if you saw those. But I want to first tell you about a friend of mine named Lois. I met Lois when I was invited to teach in her class. She's a registered nurse, and she's been teaching CNA students for many years. And as sort of an industry teacher at the College of Western Idaho, I'm often invited to go into the CNA classes and lecture about dementia and dementia care techniques. And Lois reached out to me years ago and said, "Eric, I'd like to have you come teach in my class." Well, that started a friendship that has continued to this day. And I've taught many times in her class, right up until the point that she remarried after her husband had died, and she and her new husband moved to a different part of the country. One of the really important experiences that I had with Lois surrounded the loss of her driver's license and a happy ending to that story. You see, Lois is an older woman, and she was continuing to work as a nurse and professor long after many people would have retired. And she was doing pretty well at that. She had been teaching for a lot of years, and so she was able to kind of do things on autopilot. But in other aspects of her life, things weren't going as well as they had, and driving had become increasingly difficult. She was involved in a bit of an accident, and in the aftermath of that accident, the driver's license department took away her driver's license and said, "I'm so sorry, but you don't have the cognitive skills to be able to drive anymore." Well, that was devastating for Lois. That caused her to question a lot of things in life, and it made it very difficult for her to get to her classes and to teach her students. She had to get rides, and she had to hire Ubers or taxis to go the places that she wanted to go. And she pulled me aside after class one day and said, "Eric, I really need to get my driver's license back." And I said, "I don't know if that's possible. Tell me more what happened." And she did. And she said, I want to work with you and your team. I want to do whatever I can to get my brain to a better place. Well, we did some baseline cognitive testing, and she had very poor results. Overall, she scored in the third percentile, which was considered very low. And although there were some areas of real strengths, she had significant areas that were not good at all. And a lot of those areas related to her motor speed and her planning and her judgment, kind of frontal lobe types of activities. Her memory scores were pretty decent, which was what allowed her to navigate everyday life as successfully as she was. But I saw in that testing clear-cut reasons why Lois probably shouldn't be driving. And we didn't make any promises to her. I said, "Lois, it might not be possible for you to ever drive again." She said, "I just want to maintain my independence any way that I possibly can, and I'm willing to do the work." So we rolled up our sleeves. We did an extensive panel of blood work. We looked at nutrients and hormones and inflammatory markers and genetics and metabolic parameters. And we found a lot of areas where things were good because she had prioritized her health for a long time. She'd eaten pretty cleanly. She was doing a lot of things right. She also had a shopping bag full of supplements, and we were able to sort through those and identify things that were doing virtually nothing for her and things that were giving her some good results. And we were able to identify areas where she was missing some clear-cut things. She worked with Randy Vaudry to get hormone replacement and to have some other medical guidance on some of the things that showed up in her testing. And from June of 2023, when she scored in the third percentile overall, to September of 2023, she moved her score up to the 79th percentile. And the exciting end of the story was the day that she brought in paperwork from the Driver's License Bureau. And she was able to meet with Randy, who, after the results of her cognitive test, felt comfortable signing off as a medical practitioner that he felt like she was safe to drive, especially since she didn't want to do any long trips. She just wanted to be able to drive to and from school and the grocery store and around town. And she lived in a rural enough area that most of her driving would be done on pretty safe roads. Well, I thought it was an amazing thing that Lois declared her independence. She declared it first in her mind, and she put a stake in the ground and she said, I'm going to do the work and I'm going to take charge of this. And at the end of this, we're going to circle back to the idea of what Lois did and what it truly means to declare independence. But all of us have similar opportunities in our lives. Most of us haven't lost our driver's license, but we all need to declare independence because we're all on an aging trajectory. We can take steps today and tomorrow and into the future that will change our aging trajectory. They will change our epigenetic factors. They will change our relative age compared to our biological age. If you look at the epigenetic clock tools that are out there these days, it's possible to measure how fast you're aging and put an age to it. So your chronological age might be 50, but what if your biological clock says you're 48 or 47? That would be ideal if you can change things in that manner. We can do a lot to preserve our independence as we get older. So let's dig into some of the specific things that we can do. And I want to focus on just a few areas. Area number one is with mindset. Mindset is what drives our decisions, and decisions determine destiny. It's a lot of small choices added up and compounded over time that get us to the outcomes that we will experience throughout the rest of our lives. I realize none of us has a crystal ball. None of us knows when death will come. We know that the number one cause of death is birth, and that is the end of the ride for all of us at some point. Some of us will die from accidental means, and some of us might have acute illness or injury. Some of us will be blessed to live to a real old age. But how we function in older adulthood, if we're blessed to live that long, has a whole lot to do with whether we choose to declare our independence today and take steps to keep doing that. When it comes to mindset, I think one of the most important things for us to understand is the difference between agency and choices. Many people think that having your agency means, oh, I get to make choices. But that's not what it means at all. Children make choices all the time, but they can't be held accountable for those choices because they don't have knowledge of what they're choosing or what the outcomes are. To be an agent means something different. So let's break it down. First of all, agency is the condition of being an agent. And if you're an agent, then you're choosing to represent something. If you're an agent of the FBI, you represent the FBI because you've jumped through certain hoops and you've gone through the vetting process and the training process to be qualified as an FBI agent. And as long as you follow the rules of the FBI and you choose to work there, you're allowed to be an FBI agent. You represent them. That is very different than just making choices. And when it comes to our health, there are many ways that we can either just randomly make choices or we can be an agent. And it's becoming an agent and exercising high agency that allows us to declare independence. So let's break it down a little bit further. If I held out my hand in a fist and I said, pick one, you'd laugh and you'd say, well, there's only one option. You're not really giving me a choice. You can't be an agent and represent something and choose an outcome if there's just one option. Now, I could put out both hands and I could say, pick one, and you would have a choice. So that's the first condition. To become an agent, there has to be a choice. But what if you picked my right hand and I open it up and there was a penny, and then I open up the left hand and there was a penny in that too, and you realized it didn't matter which one you picked. In order to exercise agency, you have to have a difference between the options. So you need a choice between at least two things, and the outcome must be different. But even that is not agency. That's still just making a choice. Go back to the example of children. A young child who touches a hot stove is making a choice. And choices have natural consequences. It's not that we can avoid the consequences just because we don't understand the consequences. So children touch the hot stove, they get a consequence. But then they've gained some knowledge. Now they know, oh, when I touch this thing, it hurts really badly. That elevates their capacity to be an agent in the future because now they've gained knowledge, which is the additional element required to exercise agency. So you have to have a choice. The outcome must be different from one choice to the other, and you have to have knowledge of what that outcome is and how it's going to affect you so that you can knowingly choose what it is that you want in life. When it comes to our health trajectory, we are all making choices every day. I spent a lot of years when I was in my 20s and 30s eating a lot of carbohydrates. I didn't realize what that would do to my metabolic health. I didn't understand that that's why I had gained 30 pounds and was struggling to lose them no matter how hard I exercised. So I still faced the consequence of my choice. I just didn't understand it, and so I wasn't really accountable for it. But then I learned how metabolism actually works. And I learned about insulin as our hormone of growth and storage. And suddenly I could see why I was getting the outcome that I was getting. That allowed me to become an agent and to develop the mindset of looking at food as fuel and choosing the fuel that I wanted based on the outcome that I was aiming at. That's a different level of taking action. That is what it is to be an agent instead of just making choices. Ultimately, I think many of us treat ourselves and others as objects to be acted upon, not agents to act. And humans feel best and are most successful and feel centered and alive when we act as agents instead of treating ourselves and others as objects to be acted upon, victims, so to speak. So, if we want to declare our independence, we have to become agents. And that requires paying attention to our choices, paying attention to our outcomes, and more than anything, gaining knowledge. As we gain knowledge, we then are free to act and we can choose the outcome that we want. That means if I choose to drink a full 32-ounce sugary beverage, I know what I'm choosing when I drink it. And I'm not surprised when I get the outcome that comes to me when I drink a big sugary beverage like that. And I feel kind of foggy and I can feel my sugars spike and crash. So, step one in declaring our independence is to really develop the right kind of mindset as an agent who acts instead of an object who's acted upon. Second, if we want to declare our independence, we need to pay attention to our bodies. Our bodies are what carry us through life and allow us to do the things that we need to do. And maintaining independence means maintaining a strong physical constitution. That means we need muscle mass. We need a skeleton that will support us with really strong bones that don't just snap in a stiff breeze. We need flexibility so that we can bend and twist and pick things up and do the things that we want to do. I was chatting with a friend just a couple of nights ago, and I was asking how things were going. His wife is going through chemotherapy, and it's been a very difficult time for their family. And he shared that on top of his wife's chemo, he completely threw out his back a few weeks ago. And I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, I picked up my daughter and I turned to talk to my wife. And just by holding that load and twisting, his back completely gave out." Now, I didn't talk about the root cause of that. It wouldn't have been appropriate in that situation. But I know that the reason that his back gave out is that he has not prioritized taking care of his core. He hasn't exercised those muscles in many years, and he's noticeably soft. And if you don't have a strong core, then you're much more prone to having your low back give out when you're carrying a load and you engage in a twisting motion. So, what things do we know about how to declare independence for our bodies and to keep them strong? Let's talk about muscle mass for starters. And a good place to start with maintaining muscle mass is our protein. Many of us as we age do not consume enough protein. A good rule of thumb is 0.5 to 0.7 grams of protein per pound of ideal body weight, which means that most of us probably need to be eating somewhere between 80 or 90 and 120 or 130 grams of protein every day. Now, if you haven't measured how much protein you're consuming, even for just a couple of days, that's a good place to start. Data can drive our behavior. If we measure something like that, then we have a sense of how we're doing. And there are all sorts of tools that we can use to measure body mass and to measure muscle mass and to see what our body composition is like. And if we have a sense that we're gaining weight because we're gaining muscle mass as opposed to gaining weight because we're retaining water or adding on fat, that's a really good thing. That's a sign that we're moving in the right direction. If we're going to maintain muscle mass, we also need to make sure that we're getting plenty of the amino acids that allow us to build muscle. Leucine and isoleucine and valine are critical for building muscle mass. And there are various supplements that can be used for that. You also get those in animal protein. So if you're someone who consumes meat, that's one of the reasons to consume the meat. You're getting those amino acids that are pretty essential for our ability to build muscle. If we're going to build muscle, we also have to stimulate the body to do it, which means carrying heavier loads. I see a lot of older adults who get their 2 to 5 pound dumbbells and they just sit there and they crank away while they're watching TV and they do these arm curls and they seemingly can do them forever. That's probably not the best way to build muscle mass. That's certainly far better than just sitting and being completely sedentary. So please don't stop doing that. But as long as your body is warmed up, as long as you've prepared the tissues of the body for exercise, and as long as you're not a complete rookie at it, and your doctor approves of it, then it might be time to start lifting a little bit heavier. Dr. Vonda Wright, who's a longevity expert and a physiologist, is an incredible resource in terms of knowing how to build muscle mass in older adults. And she's lectured many times about the importance of lifting heavy. For major muscle groups, she recommends lifting enough weight that you can only do 3 sets of 4 repetitions. And for smaller muscle groups, like our biceps, you do 3 sets of 8 repetitions. And if at the end of each set you're really struggling and you're pushing to really do that curl or whatever the exercise is, then you know that you're genuinely lifting heavy. And over time, your capacity to lift weight should be increasing. Very early in my career, I was hired as the program director at an assisted living community. And this community had a beautiful exercise room with all sorts of equipment that used air instead of free weights to provide resistance, because researchers at Tufts University determined that that was safer for older adults. So here was this gorgeous gym with equipment especially designed for seniors, and nobody was using it. Well, I came to work there a year after that community had opened, and I was tasked with building a program curriculum to really help the residents with their spiritual, physical, intellectual, cultural, and emotional well-being. And so as we sought to build use of that gym, I worked with a physical therapist who saw some of our residents. And we developed a program where every new resident that moved into that community would have an evaluation by Richard, the physical therapist. And if they met criteria that Medicare would pay for physical therapy, then we talked to their primary care doctor, we got the orders, and Richard started working with them. And he would work as long as they met criteria for continued therapy. He did those therapies in the gym, and he kept track of what he was doing with those people. And at the time of discharge, we had prepared a sheet that allowed us to collect everything that Richard was doing in an organized program. It would say, on this machine, this person does X number of repetitions of this weight. And Richard would basically hand them off to our program. We started calling residents. We would remind them that they had an appointment at the gym. And we would crank up some nice, fun music. We would get to know those residents. We would tell stories. We made it a very social experience. And it was fun. And we had a high degree of success getting the large percentage of our residents coming down for their physical exercise appointments multiple times a week. What I watched in that program was remarkable because I saw elderly women who couldn't pick up a bag of groceries start exercising in such a way, doing the actions that would be required to be able to pick up the bag of groceries, and they got to where they could do it. And well beyond that, because we regularly increased the amount of weight that they were lifting. I saw people who could barely do a 2-pound curl progress to 5 pounds. And then pretty soon they were doing 8 pounds, and then they could curl 10 pounds. I saw people who could bench press 40 pounds, and they were struggling, progress to the point that they could put up 70 pounds. And what that means from a practical standpoint is in that assisted living community, we did not have nearly as many falls as a lot of our competitors had. Residents often had a longer average length of stay because they were more capable. We had a lot fewer two-person transfers, which was allowed in that facility. I know some places don't allow that, but it was authorized in that community. But when you help people build muscle mass, it does a tremendous amount for their independence. Now, we also have to build bone health if we're going to keep our bodies strong. And that means a lot of different things. It means getting calcium to our bones. And to do that, we need to consume foods that are rich in calcium, but we also need to have plenty of vitamin D3 and plenty of vitamin K2. D3 and K2 act kind of like runners in a relay race. So imagine that calcium is the baton, and the first runner to pick up the baton is vitamin D3. D3 in the body is a hormone that signals in a lot of different ways. It influences the expression of almost 1,000 genes in the body. But one of the primary things that D3 is doing for our bones is that it picks up calcium and it pulls it into our system so that it can be used. It improves the absorption. But then that baton of calcium gets passed off to vitamin K2, which allows calcium to move out of arteries where we don't want it building up and move it into the bones and into our teeth. So if you're supplementing with D3, it's a good idea to also supplement with vitamin K2. If we're taking our D3 and our K2, then it's also important that we build bone health by putting our bones under a load. And that means lifting some heavy things. Sometimes in the research world, there are natural experiments. These are experiments that happen with ideal conditions just because of the way that people are living and the choices that they're making. And you don't have to design special conditions to test something. Bone health is one of those areas where there are some really good natural experiments. For example, researchers have looked at tennis players, and they've measured the bone density of tennis players' dominant versus non-dominant arm. And the dominant arm of a tennis player is usually about 20% more dense than the bones in the non-dominant arm. I find that remarkable. Tennis rackets aren't all that heavy, but when you're swinging something like a tennis racket over and over and over and putting that arm under a load, you're doing a tremendous amount to drive calcium into the bone structure and make that bone stronger. So if we want to declare our independence, we've got to do everything possible to keep our bones strong. Now, one other thing I'd mention is hormone replacement. I was speaking with a doctor from Indiana just yesterday. She's preparing to provide services in an assisted living community that we support. And there was a lot of alignment about the things that we were discussing. I asked her opinion about hormone replacement in older women. She said, "Eric, I have plenty of clients who are 75, 80, 85 years old, and I still prescribe estradiol and progesterone and testosterone to them. Because if I don't do that, their bones get brittle." We talked about the fact that bone cells have estradiol receptors. And one of the reasons that almost 100% of women will develop osteoporosis if they live long enough is that the longer you live without the nourishing supportive hormones, the more what's called osteoclastic activity starts to outpace osteoblastic activity. So blastic sounds kind of like blasting off. So imagine that bone cell production is blasting off. You're making lots of bone cells. Osteoclastic activity is the breaking down of bone cells. Our bodies have to be able to do both. If all we did was build bone cells all the time, we would look like Andre the Giant or other people that have certain challenges that just cause their bones to keep growing and growing and growing. So we need a balance between osteoblastic and osteoclastic activity. But when we lose estradiol because of menopause and not doing hormone replacement, if women live long enough, then they start breaking down bone cells faster than they're formed, which is a recipe for brittle bones. Now, men, of course, can develop osteoporosis. It just doesn't happen in the same rates that it does with women. So hormone replacement, though probably not for everyone, is something that new research is pointing to that more and more people probably need to be considering so that we can maintain our independence as we age. Our risk of death from a hip fracture or a femur fracture within 12 months is our age as a percentage. So if you're 90 years old and you break your hip, you have a 90% chance that you won't live through the next 12 months. And in my personal observational experience serving thousands of elderly people for the last 26 years, most people don't make it more than a couple of weeks if they break their hip. So we don't want to play around with things like bone health. When it comes to flexibility, that's equally important. You could have strong bones and strong muscles, but if you can't move and twist and you're not flexible and all of your joints and tissues are really tight, that can hinder independence and you're more likely to be injured. 5 minutes a day of doing stretching exercises will pay huge dividends in the long run. It will be far easier to do just a few minutes of stretching every day and improve our mobility than to deal with the problems of immobility. So what do? I suggest finding something that you really enjoy. If you like yoga, do yoga. That's a really good way to maintain flexibility. If you enjoy dancing, that actually is kind of moving things and stretching it as well as giving you some cardiovascular exercise. If you like to do Qigong or Tai Chi, wonderful. Those are good ways to move and limber up the joints. I know some people that are religious and doing foam rolling exercises that has a lot of release of the fascia, the connective tissues in the body. And they also combine other stretching exercises with it. Whatever you do, make sure that you are warming up before exercise by doing dynamic stretching. Too many people do static stretching before they have a workout. Static stretching is when you hold a pose and you stretch that muscle out. Everybody I know who trains athletes has said, no, you do dynamic stretching before the workout and static stretching afterward. Dynamic stretching is like standing in place and kicking your leg up and touching your toe with it, if you're able to do that safely without losing your balance. Dynamic stretching is when you're doing stretching exercises that have you moving. It's also a good idea to warm up the joints and tissues. And if you've followed John Sinclair and Dan Tatton from 7 Movements Health here in our AmFast community, you know that they recommend the rub and scrub method, where you might rub and scrub on a joint to heat up the tissue and to move fluid into that joint so that it's less likely to be injured. I've had tremendous success applying that, and I know that many of you have as well. So let's declare our independence by taking the steps to preserve muscle mass, taking the steps to make sure that our skeletal system is really strong, taking the steps to make sure that we're also flexible. As an added incentive, I'll mention Dr. Vonda Wright's research from the early 2000s, where she compared the quadriceps, the big thigh muscles, of a young triathlete versus a 70-year-old triathlete versus a 70-year-old sedentary man. If you haven't seen the imaging of that, send me a message and I will send you the picture because it's remarkable. The quadricep muscles of the young triathlete and the 70-year-old triathlete are virtually identical. Big, thick, healthy, dark, strong muscles. But the picture of the 70-year-old who's been sedentary for decades looks like a piece of Kobe beef. There's a little bit of muscle and a whole lot of fat packed around it. And that image alone can help us understand, at a glance, why being physically active makes such a difference in our independence. So we've talked about mindset. We've talked about maintaining strong bodies. Let's talk about what it takes to maintain a strong brain. Because I know plenty of people whose bodies are actually quite strong, but they can't remember who they are. They can't remember who their families are. They don't remember what happened 5 seconds ago, literally, because their brain has lost 50 to 70% of its mass, and they're in late stages of Alzheimer's disease. I've seen people who have strong bodies, but their brains can't control them because they're not producing enough dopamine. They have Parkinson's disease, and they're really deteriorating. So what does it take to improve the brain? Well, those of you here in our AmFast community know because we talk about it all the time. But I'll review a short list of some of the most impactful things. And if you're here live, I invite you to just listen and ask yourself, how am I doing at that thing? I would bet that all of us could find at least one thing where we could more firmly put a stake in the ground and declare our independence by doing that thing. So let's talk about two broad categories. There are lifestyle factors, and then there are biomarkers, things that are measurable in a blood test or a stool sample or a urine test. In terms of lifestyle, brain training is one of the things on the list. And brain training is not doing Sudoku or crosswords. Brain training means novel cognitive experiences, new things for the brain that stimulate the brain to make new connections. It could be as simple as doing a task with your non-dominant hand. It might be learning a new language, learning an instrument. My wife has recently been giving piano lessons to a woman in our neighborhood who's in her 70s because she finally retired from doing taxes, and she said, I need to learn to play the piano. I've always wanted to do it, and I'm still here, so why not now? I complimented her on doing some brain training because that's a fantastic way to stimulate new connections. She's having to learn new motor skills. She's having to learn to read things in a different way and learn to read music. It's a challenging exercise, and it hasn't been easy for her, but that's good brain training. Brain HQ is an app that we've talked about here in our AmFast community many times. And what's simple to do is simple not to do. Some people have tried Brain HQ, and they've even seen the research on it and how good it is and how much it really can help us. But we've drifted from doing it consistently. Maybe there's more that we could do to stimulate our brains from day to day. Exercise is also a lifestyle factor, and we talked quite a bit about physical activity. But I want to add one more detail that I didn't mention when I talked about maintaining muscle mass and bone health. A lot of people get out and go for regular walks. That's something that I do with my wife, usually twice a day. And walking is great, but there's really good research to show that what benefits people more than hours of walking is 10 minutes of extremely vigorous exercise. Now, obviously, you'd want to have your doctor's approval. You don't want to do anything too crazy that might stress the system too much. You might need to work up to doing something like this. But if you exercise vigorously enough that you're out of breath, and you do that for 10 minutes, the physiological benefits of that have been shown to be in excess of hours of walking. So please keep walking. Please keep getting out there and helping our bowels function by being upright and allowing gravity to do its work. Please keep getting outside, especially in nature, because that's really good for our brains. And all that movement is really good. It's been said that motion is lotion. But if we can prioritize 10 minutes of really vigorous activity, the kind that leaves us sweaty and out of breath, that will do as much as hours of other types of less strenuous activity. It's a good target to aim for. You don't even have to do all of that exercise in one fell swoop. My wife gets on her exercise bike and she'll warm up for about 4 minutes, and then she'll go really hard for 1 to 2 minutes and just be out of breath. and then she'll slow it down for a minute, and then she'll go really hard for another minute or two, and then slow it down. That's an excellent way of revving the metabolic engine and giving the body a reason to be resilient. Diet is incredibly impactful when it comes to lifestyle decisions. We are what we eat in many ways. And a lot of people get hung up on all the different dietary options and dietary choices that there are out there. Should we be carnivore or paleo? Or should we be flexitarian or vegetarian or any one of the other diets that are out there? And all of those diets have pretty tight parameters. And there are reasons for those tools in the toolbox. And a lot of strict diets have some benefits and they have some weaknesses. So rather than getting off into the weeds of specialty diets here and there, like we sometimes do, I want to just talk about a few overall principles. And if you're listening to this, ask yourself, how am I doing with these core basic principles? Principle number 1, avoid ultra-processed food like the plague. 60% of the calories that the average American eats comes from ultra-processed food these days. And there's plenty of research to support that that is a disaster for our brains just waiting to happen. It's throwing gas on an inflammatory fire every time we do it. Now, I'm not saying there's never a time that you could possibly eat at a fast food restaurant, but that should be the rare exception, not the rule. Whatever you do dietarily, make sure that it controls your blood sugar. If you've never worn a continuous glucose monitor, you can get one from Stelo, S-T-E-L-O, or HelloLingo. Both of those websites will sell direct-to-consumer glucose monitors for less than $100, and you can wear it for a couple of weeks and see how your body's responding. And the idea is that your average sugars should be well under 100, more like 80 to 85. And when you eat, maybe they rise up a little bit and they come up over 100. But a lot of people, when they eat and they are wearing a glucose monitor, are shocked at what the foods that they consume on a regular basis are doing to them. So whatever you do, control your sugars because that's essential for brain health. Make sure that you're eating the rainbow because a lot of brain health problems start in the gut. It's now widely believed that Parkinson's disease starts in the gut, and that's the fastest growing neurodegenerative condition on the planet. To keep the gut healthy, we have to eat a lot, we have to eat a little of a lot of things. So eat all sorts of different colorful vegetables and fruits so that you're getting all the different phytonutrients that come with that. That is what the bacteria of the gut live on. And you're also getting a lot more fiber. Most of us do not get nearly enough fiber, which is less for us, I think, than it is for the bacteria of the gut. That's who we're eating for when we're consuming fiber to a great extent. And most people feel better and function better, and they establish really good regularity with their bowels when they eat a lot more fiber and a lot more fruits and vegetables. So be thoughtful about that. Now, along with diet, we have to be careful of the tools that allow us to consume all that food, our teeth. Dental health is critical for brain health. If you've never had a cone beam CT scan, but you're someone who's had root canals, find a biological dentist who understands that a lot of root canals can go bad. When you remove the root of a tooth, you're removing the blood supply. And removing the blood supply allows different anaerobes, like spirochetes, that flourish in a low oxygen environment to do just that. And if you have anaerobes that are starting to proliferate, sometimes it can etch away bone structure and leave holes in the bone that allow pathogens like P. gingivalis bacteria to enter the bloodstream. We've seen some pretty dramatic cases here to Mind for All Seasons of people who had real improvement when those holes in the bone structure were corrected and improved, and that source of infection into the bloodstream was cut off. In addition to all of the lifestyle factors that we've talked about so far, I can't leave off sleep, because sleep is when the brain takes out the trash. That is when the glymphatic system runs. When we're asleep, the brain shrinks a little bit, the fluid-filled spaces, the ventricles open up, the body makes about 1.5 cups of cerebrospinal fluid and bathes the brain in that fluid. Recent research shows that if you use sleeping medications like Ambien, it actually disrupts the production of norepinephrine. And while we're in deep sleep, researchers have discovered that very slow waves of norepinephrine cause a pulsing or pumping action in the brain that allows the cellular waste and debris and misfolded proteins to come up into the glymphatic system and be flushed out into the lymphatic system. So now it's not recommended to use hypnotic medications like Ambien for any long length of time because it disrupts our ability to properly clear the waste at night. Now, there's a lot more that could be said about sleep. But if you've never been screened for sleep apnea, that's also low-hanging fruit for many people. A lot of individuals have no idea that they are not getting enough oxygen at night. At the very least, you can use one of the many wearable devices that are available and see what your oxygen level is doing at night with your Oura Ring or your Whoop Band. Or you could talk to your primary care doctor about doing an overnight oximetry test. And if the test comes back great, and if you're getting good oxygen levels at night, then you can rule that out as a potential factor. It's also critical to make sure that you're getting at least 7 to 8 hours of deep, restful sleep at night. It's so restorative, and we can't say enough good about it. Your metabolic health will not be what it needs to be if you're not sleeping really well. Finally, on the lifestyle side, stress management makes a significant impact on all of us. And we can't avoid all the stressors that we face in life, but we certainly can prioritize our counterbalancing. If you're listening to these factors and you're saying, yeah, I do most of these things, but I'm looking for something that I might be missing. Often the thing that I see missing when I'm coaching people is that they're not proactively counterbalancing stress. They're aware that they're more stressed, but they're not doing breath work or going out for a walk or sitting down with a good friend for a conversation, or working a puzzle, or playing an instrument, or meditating out in the sunshine in the backyard, or whatever it is that really helps you to calm the system down. When you proactively counterbalance, it makes a tremendous difference. One thing that's easy to do that we learned here in the AmFast community from Dr. Nick Wignall is scheduled worry, where you just plan 10 minutes every day to sit down and write out all the things that you're currently worried about. And at the end of 10 minutes, you crumple up the paper and throw it away. It's merely an exercise in sitting with the things that are stressful. So we've talked about a lot of different lifestyle factors. On the biomarker side, things that you can measure in a blood test or another test, things that might be modifiable with dietary changes or a supplement or even a medication. There are a lot of things that could be tested. And many people who are watching this have done extensive testing with us here at Mind for All Seasons. But it's also important to understand the lowest hanging fruit. And when it comes to brain health, I think a lot of what the research has pointed to is making sure that our B vitamin levels are really optimal. And that homocysteine, which is an amino acid that gets elevated when you don't have enough B vitamins or you're not using those B vitamins, you make sure that that's under control, meaning it's less than 7. I see people every day of the week who have homocysteine levels of 10, 13, 20, 30, even higher. And it's been shown now in multiple research studies in the last 20 years that if your homocysteine level is 14 to 16 or higher, that alone is an independent risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. So if we're going to declare independence, we've got to deal with B vitamins and homocysteine. We also need to deal with omega-3 fatty acid levels. The Oxford Project to Investigate Memory and Aging that's been running since 1998, if I remember correctly. It's one of the longest running projects in the world. They have identified that if you have homocysteine less than 7, an optimal B12 level, like around 1,000, and if you have a folate level that's greater than 15, and if you have an omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acid ratio of 4 to 1 or lower, then that correlates with 73% less brain shrinkage over time. That's a big payoff for just a few factors. And yet I just met with somebody yesterday whose homocysteine at baseline was 16, and they had completely drifted from even taking a B vitamin supplement. People can't afford to do that, especially if they have genetic challenges that affect their ability to use B vitamins, like having MTHFR genetic problems. So if we pay attention to lifestyle, if we pay attention to some of these biomarkers that are really critical, and if we optimize those things, we get better results. So what's left? If your body's really strong, if your mindset is great, and if you are doing everything that you can to preserve your brain health by understanding the fundamental things that will make the biggest difference, what else is there to declaring independence? I think the founders of the United States of America were onto something when they recognized through the course of human events, as the Declaration itself reminds us, that it was necessary to sever the ties that had the colonists bound to Great Britain. They basically said, this relationship is not working for us. We're not getting the things that we need, and we feel like it's time to make a change. And so they did. And the key is they did it together. They united as colonists, and they declared independence, and they did it by pledging their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor. They left it all out there. They knew that they were risking death when they did this. If we're going to declare independence, if we're going to leave the sick care system, we need to do it together. And that's the last step. I think it takes a community to do this well because, as I said earlier, what is simple to do is simple not to do. And it's extremely easy to drift over time. The thing that prevents drift is having a community of people who are all striving to do the same thing. The thing that keeps us from running and hiding from things that might be a little bit hard to do are when we see other people doing those kinds of things. It wasn't a single colonist like George Washington declaring independence. It wasn't Thomas Jefferson who actually wrote the Declaration declaring independence by himself. To do that would be basically just signing your own death warrant. But to do it together was a different thing. And when it comes to the sick care system, it's critical that we collectively recognize that it hasn't served us well. And it's time to sever the bands to the system that has told us for our whole lives, you wait until you're sick, and then you go to the doctor, and you hope that he or she has a magic pill for you. That hasn't worked very well in most cases. And it's time to declare our independence and to do it together. That's one of the reasons why we've worked so hard here at A Mind for All Seasons to build community. It's why we do these weekly masterclasses so that we can come together and we can discuss things like this and we can learn together as a group and we can declare our independence. Part of what makes Alcoholics Anonymous as an organization very successful is that once alcoholics get to recovery, they then participate in helping others get to a point of recovery. And that effort to help others becomes part of their own recovery itself. When you know that other people are counting on you to set the example and to show the way, it's easier to be consistent. One of the things that keeps me going in my own life and in my own health is our community of people who are all counting on each other to show up and do the very best that we can to declare independence and to do the things necessary to maintain it. So as we come to the end of our time today, I hope that you've found something that you can do to a little bit greater extent or a little bit more fully that allows you to declare your independence. I can't think of a better way to celebrate Independence Day than thinking about our long-term health trajectory, to focus on our health spans, and to do everything possible to be independent. As we close, I'll mention one of my friends. We'll call him Steve. When I first met Steve, he was 62 years old. He was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. And he didn't just take the first neurologist's diagnosis. He actually went to a second and a third neurologist, and they all confirmed the diagnosis. And they all said, I'm sorry, there's not much that we can do. In the words of Hal Cranmer, one of our community members, it was diagnose and adios, because they didn't have a whole lot to offer. And Steve was devastated. He was forced into an early retirement. And earlier in life, a psychologist tested him and called him a genius. But this genius did a cognitive test here at A Mind for All Seasons, and he scored in the 8th percentile for his memory. That genius was not having genius level experiences because of early onset Alzheimer's. We helped him with all the things that we've talked about in this session today because he wanted to be independent. And from July to December of 2023, he was able to go from the 8th percentile to the 91st percentile in his memory scores. That's what it means to declare independence, to not sit back and to just take it on the chin when life seems to offer a real setback. If you can act as an agent, if you can move forward and do some things to control your health trajectory, then you're truly declaring independence. And my friend Steve realized the most important thing that any of us can realize when it comes to our health, and that's that we're the ones in charge of it. It's not our doctor's job to ensure our health. They help us, and we need good physicians. But ultimately, no one will ever care about your body as much as you do, and certainly no one cares about my body as much as I do. And once we realize that we have some control over our health trajectory, then declaring independence can really start to mean something. Well, thanks for being with me. I hope this has been meaningful to you. Let's go to a little bit of Q&A.